I thank the member and recognize the member for Saanich South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honour to rise in this legislature and contribute to the debate on the Budget 2014 from the elected seat of Saanich South. The treasure this government has the privilege to spend is derived from the extraordinary natural wealth of this province. And of course, one of our greatest resources of all are the people of British Columbia. Their ingenuity, their labour and creativity allows this government a $44,416 million budget. The privilege of spending the provincial coffer brings with it a tremendous responsibility. Responsibility to increase opportunities for all British Columbians. Responsibility to link prosperity with equality. Responsibility to protect our environment. And responsibility to mitigate climate change so we're prepared for a changing future. Responsibility to engage all citizens to embrace what they have to offer. And by those measures, surely measures that matter most, this budget is a failure, a complete failure. The failure to focus on our climate change crisis and preparing us for the challenges this will bring us is irresponsible and negligent. The failure to acknowledge the rapidly growing gap between rich and poor is cruel and a foolish political choice. The choice to underfund the very things that would grow our middle class, making our economy the very strongest it could be, is irrational and it's reckless. How did we get to this point? Part of the answer lies in the simple fact that this government has been in power for too long. Like all governments that become entrenched, this government has fallen in love with itself. We no longer have a people's government, a place where British Columbians are represented. We have a government that believes its own spin, regardless of facts. A government that has stopped listening to the 4.5 million citizens that live in BC, shushing them away so they can hear more clearly the words coming from their own government song sheets. There are many examples where this is very apparent. The first example is the record of how many days we have sat in this chamber, just 36 days in all of 2013, shutting down democracy so that I suppose more mirrors could be hung around the cabinet table, reflecting only the thoughts of conformity and concurrence, and tolerating no room for dialogue or disagreement, no room for democracy in their house of mirrors. Next obvious example of a government which governs by elitism is shutting down parliamentary committees. How ironic that the Premier recently rattled off an official announcement of legislative committees when we all know most will never sit at all. It's obvious to me that the Empress has no clothes. Our democratically elected Premier has a very thin commitment to democracy itself, and it's not surprising then she called Victoria a sick culture. In fact, the parliamentary committees have much to offer. I have had the pleasure of sitting on the two select standing committees that are bipartisan and sit regularly. They are Public Accounts and the Standing Committee on Finance. Both committees have been extremely useful to the work of this House. They are places where all members have value. The BC Liberal government fails to recognize that each of us in this House represent a part of British Columbia. We were all elected to participate in governing this province. Select standing committees allow us to do that, and I believe that's why they are underutilized by this current regime. I called for a select standing committee on agriculture for 4 years straight, but my request was ignored by the BC Liberals. That, in my view, is completely daft. It's like building a house of cards and expecting it to be strong. The funny thing is that this government believes that British Columbians gave them a mandate in the last election to do whatever they wanted to do in this budget, but the election results actually tell a different story. 3.1 million of BC's 4.5 million population registered to vote in the last election, and only 52% of registered voters voted. That means that only about 1.6 million people voted out of 4.5 million residents. And of course, they didn't all vote for the BC Liberals. In fact, 733,000 voters voted BC Liberal, but 2.5 million registered voters didn't. That's the way our system works at the moment, and it's allowed the BC Liberals to stay in power. And we all have to live with that and work with that unfortunate reality for 3 more years. But given the numbers, one might think that the BC Liberal government, instead of being punch-drunk in love with itself, would have a little respect for everyone else in BC, regardless of how they voted. They have been given the honour of governing BC. It's not supposed to be a position of entitlement, but as we see in this chamber and outside this chamber, they continue to primp and preen and apply lipstick in the rearview mirror while driving through the red lights in British Columbia. This is today's BC Liberals. Over the last week, my colleagues have exposed numerous deep flaws in this budget. There is a theme in Budget 2014, pay more and get less. The BC Liberals have a sorry history of broken promises, bungled initiatives, and eye-popping boondoggles. I know that this debate and the estimate debate to follow creates a thin opening through which we can poke and prod the members opposite. Maybe, just maybe, they will acknowledge to themselves in a quiet moment of obvious truth that the budget could be improved if they listen to their opponents with humility and an open mind. That is the respect that all British Columbians deserve from this government. This budget would be improved if they used our criticisms to identify and correct the errors and shortcomings which are inescapable in a project of this kind. To that end, I will focus my remarks on 5 areas: the environment, small business, tourism, arts and culture, and agriculture.